Hello, my friends. Today we'll start with very interesting news, namely that Trump has begun threatening Russia with consequences if Putin doesn't meet with Zelensky.
If they don't, how long are you willing to let this play out? And if they don't meet, will there be consequences, and how soon for Russia?
Yeah, there could be very big consequences, but we'll see what happens. There might be very big consequences because this is something that has to end. This war would have never taken.
As we can see, every time Trump promises that in just a few weeks he will impose powerful sanctions and so on, but in reality he does absolutely nothing, and Putin continues the war. Trump also added that every conversation with Putin goes well, but the war still continues. Every one of my conversations with Putin is good, but then unfortunately a bomb gets dropped on Kyiv or somewhere else, and then I get very angry about it, Trump said. The US president was asked whether he had spoken with the Russian dictator since last Monday after his meeting with Zelensky and European leaders. Trump answered in the affirmative. And he said that the Ministry of War sounds better than the Ministry of Defense.
All right?
That's coming.
You let me know if you want to do it. I think Department of War. It just sounded bad. He said, sir, on behalf of the Department of Defense. Defense. I don't want to be defense only. We want defense, but we want offense too.
But whether this concerns Ukraine is still a question. And now, let's move on to the situation along the front line, and here there are many changes. Let's start with the Kostyantynivka direction. Here the Russians managed to capture Shcherbynivka, Katerynivka, parts of Oleksandro-Shultine, and advanced in the area of Novopavlivka. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian forces liberated Rusin Yar and advanced through the fields near Poltavka. At the same time, the Russians again trying to storm Rusin Yar and retake the lost village. They are also breaking through in the Shcherbynivka area under Ukrainian control. The village of Klebanbyk still remains. The Russians want to capture it in the coming days as there have already been breakthroughs there. In addition, the Russians are trying to advance in the Chasiv Yar area. According to the latest data, a couple of the city's outermost streets are still under Ukrainian control, but the Russians are advancing there. They're also storming Maiske, and in fact, the Russians are expanding their controlled territory here in order to move toward encircling Konstantinivka. So the situation here is very tense, and the fighting continues. Soldiers on the ground describe it in this way. Kostyantynivka direction. The Russians are consolidating in most of Katerynivka in order to build up resources for a further strike on Klebanbyk. Of course, our fighters are hitting them, but Russian artillery and aviation interfere with our work, and the Russians are using this to quickly take advantageous positions. On Klebanbyk, right now this settlement is at the center of the confrontation. The Russians are trying to bypass it from different sides to cut supply lines and encircle the village. Constant assaults are carried out using drones, aviation, and heavy artillery. In Shcherbynivka, the Russians have entrenched themselves, but not fully yet, systematically concentrating forces and pulling in unmanned aerial vehicle units to actively strike our logistics. In the Oleksandro-Shultine area, the situation is also difficult. The village is under Russian fire control, and battles continue for holding positions. For now, the western part remains with us, while everything else is in Russian hands. At this moment, the settlement is in a precarious state. In the Dobropillia direction, the Ukrainian forces managed to liberate Volodymyrivka, but at the same time lost Pankivka. This has allowed the Russians to start advancing toward the village of Shahove. The situation here remains extremely difficult, with practically head-on battles taking place. The Russians are also trying to expand their controlled territory so that the Ukrainians cannot cut off the salient. Therefore, they are storming Nove Shahove as well as Nikhanorivka. In addition, fighting continues around Kucherov Yar. On the one hand, Ukrainian forces pushed the Russians back, but on the other, they managed to advance from the east of the village. The battle here is ongoing. It's clear that the Russians have pulled in significant reserves and are trying to push forward. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are storming Родинське, Красний Лиман, Новоекономічне, Миколаївка, Лисівка, Chunishine, the outskirts of Pokrovsk, Udachne, and are breaking through in the area of Zvirove. It has also been confirmed that Ukrainian forces pushed the Russians back significantly by about 5 kilometers. However, since there have been no changes of improvement on the flanks, the situation here remains catastrophic and the activity of the Russians is not decreasing. At the same time, information has appeared showing how the Russians advanced in the Kostyantynivka and Pokrovsk directions from January 1st, 2025 to today. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are storming Filia, and according to the statements even from Ukrainian soldiers, the Russians have already managed to gain a foothold on the outskirts. Ukrainian forces pushed them back from the village of Iskra, but the Russians are now trying to retake lost positions. In the Voskresenka area, fighting continues, but no longer for the outskirts. Within a day, the Russians captured the entire village perimeter. They are now attempting to advance further, with their progress here amounting to about 400 meters. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians have sharply increased their activity. They succeeded in capturing Timirivka and Zaporizhzhia and advanced beyond Maliivka. This means the situation here continues to deteriorate. Only recently we saw Russian advances in this sector, and now, once again, the front line is shifting not in Ukraine's favor. The Russians are storming Novomykolaivka, breaking through toward Kalynivske, and storming Kamushuvacha. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are pushing beyond Plavny and trying to gain a foothold there, but over the past day there have been no changes. Ukrainian forces are still managing to repel all attacks. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians continue shelling the right bank, but no new assaults are being recorded along the front line and the situation remains stable. Now let's move on to the Siversk direction. Here, the Russians also continue the offensive very actively. They are pushing toward Dronivka, storming Serebryanka, advancing in the area of Verkhnyo-Kamensk and Vyimka, and attacking Pereizhny and Fedorivka. Over the past day, there have been no changes, but the situation remains very difficult. In the Lyman direction, there are also changes, this time for the better. Ukrainian forces managed to push the Russians back near Kharkivka and liberate Novopavlivka. Counterattacks continue, but the Russians are also carrying out offensive actions, storming Dvorichna, advancing near Yampolivka, assaulting Shandrigolova and Serednya, trying to retake Novopavlivka and pushing toward Druzhilubivka. Thus, the fighting here also remains very intense. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Zeleny High, but they have had no success, and the situation hasn't changed over the past day. Meanwhile, in the Kupyansk direction, the Russians managed to advance toward Sokolin, the city, and are building on their gains. Today, they are also attempting to storm the outskirts of the city and Golubivka. At the same time, heavy shelling continues, and the situation here is deteriorating. In the Dvorichna direction, the Russians are pushing toward Doroshivka and assaulting Kolodezhny. However, despite constant attacks, the front line here has been held, and there have been no changes for quite some time. In the Velykyi Burluk direction, no new attacks have been recorded so far, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are not conducting any new assaults, and the front line hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. Similarly, they attack in Vovchansk, but as before, there are no changes. In the Sumy direction, the Russians continue attacks in the areas of Novomykolaiivka, Yablonivka, and across the border. Activity is rising again, with around 10 assaults reported per day, but they haven't achieved any success, and the front line remains unchanged. At the same time, reports indicate that Russia has completed preparations for large-scale strikes on Ukrainian territory this fall. Russia has finalized preparations for a massive operation aimed at destroying Ukraine's gas and energy infrastructure. The operation is planned to start in mid-September. Unlike the 2022-2023 campaign, this one is based on causing irreversible damage. Targets will include not only power plants but also substations, distribution hubs, storage facilities, and gas compressor stations. The Kremlin's goal is to leave no more than 20% of generation online, enough only for basic life support. The destruction will also be used in an information war, blaming Ukraine for self-inflicted collapse. According to forecasts, the heating season could begin with a devastated energy system, leading to a crisis in the economy, defense, and daily life. Zelensky stated today that Russia is attempting to disrupt Ukraine's preparation for winter by striking energy infrastructure. This involves not only electricity and heat generation, but also natural gas extraction. This year, we may indeed face a very harsh winter. So, preparations must begin today. Friends, be sure to share your thoughts on this in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.